Hi, everyone. I'm Big John, and this week on Liberty Lens, we're going to dig into a story that's about more than just one tragic fatal shooting in Minneapolis. When ICE agent Jonathan Ross killed Renee Good, a 37-year-old U.S. citizen, during an enforcement operation, the nation didn't just ask what happened. It asked, why did it happen in the first place? Because this tragedy did not occur in a vacuum. It came amid the Trump administration's largest ever surge of ICE officers into a Democratic-led city. A crackdown critics say has stoked confrontations and undermined trust in law enforcement. When we look at the conflicting narratives and the legal stakes, we will face the big question head on. Did the administration's tactics set the tone for this tragedy, or was this an unavoidable moment of chaos? Join us on Liberty Lens as we answer the question. And of course, helping me answer this question, none other than my good friend, co-host, and former law enforcement officer, Mr. Mike Maat. Mike, how are you doing today?
Good. It's good to be with you. I'm sorry it's under these circumstances. This is an important conversation. I look forward to having it with you, but I'm sorry it's so necessary.
Yeah, it is a tragedy. First and foremost, before we get to the politics, before we get into anything, it's very important. A woman was killed. By all accounts, a non-criminal woman, not someone who is a danger to society, and ended up dead. A 37-year-old woman, a mother of 3 children, I believe, ended up dead. So, Mike, I'm going to briefly. It is a tragedy. Go ahead. I didn't mean to cut
No,
you
I
off.
was going to. I'm just supporting what you said. It is a huge tragedy, and by the way, sometimes we need to remind ourselves it is a tragedy when someone is killed who is a criminal, who is engaged in criminal behavior, who was trying to commit a crime. It's
Right.
no less a tragedy. We're going to be discussing in some significant detail a long sequence of events, as you just teed up. I would argue almost every step of which was handled incorrectly
Right.
by every single person involved.
Right. Right.
All of the law enforcement officers, all of the people who were in that street, the administration before, the administration after, the supervision, uh, local officials. I think there's enough blame to go around, not just for the event, but for the ridiculous situation we find ourselves in politically after the event. I have found virtually no one who has handled this as they should have, much less going above and beyond the call of duty to try to put our nation and our communities in a better spot. The other thing, John, I wanted to mention is we're going to be going through a lot of this in some detail and asking a variety of different questions, right?
Right.
Policy questions, legal questions, possibly making predictions about the way this might pan out, what would happen if there were a trial, blah, blah, lots of different questions, right?
Right.
Every one of those questions is different, not just in shades of gray, but wholly completely different with a completely different set of facts involved. And I think it's important. We'll remind our audience as we go through this, but for folks in the audience who are looking for which side do you guys come down on, this is going to be a very disappointing podcast for you. This is a very complex situation in which everybody messed up. And if you're just looking for, a libertarian who hates cops, or a cop who hates liberty, or a reason to hang your hat on why the cop did the right thing, or where the reasons for blaming him for having done all the wrong things, this is going to be a very disappointing podcast for you. If you, on the other hand, are the kind of person who can discipline your thinking and your emotions and wants to really understand what happened, but also put it in context of legality and policy, then I think this is one of the most important podcasts you and I have ever done. You, as a long-term libertarian and observer of such situations, as you pointed out, I was a cop for 11 and a half years. I was a training officer. I've been through a lot of use of force situations. and certified defensive tactics instructor. Um, as a local cop, I would argue in a better position to weigh in on a lot of these issues than a federal officer. Will get into that.
Right. And I think you make a good point because there is no clear answers here. Certainly emotions run high. And I think we'll go into it. We'll try to state facts, I think, especially me. I tend to be a little more biased in these situations. I'll try to state facts as facts, trying to avoid spin. I will appreciate you checking me on that, making sure that I don't throw in my own personal opinions.
We'll check each other. Yeah,
We'll check
we'll keep
each other.
each other on straight.
But let's give it a shot here. So basically, on Wednesday, January 7th, ICE agent Jonathan Ross shot and killed Renee Nicole Good, a 37-year-old U.S. citizen and mother of three, during an immigration enforcement operation in a residential neighborhood in Minneapolis. Not that it matters, but just in terms of placing it, if you're from Minnesota, about 1 mile from where George Floyd was killed in 2020. So the situation here is that,
which could turn out to be relevant politically speaking going forward. But
politically, you might be right. So this woman, Renee Nicole Good, it's very important to note, she was not the target of the operation. She was not physically engaged with ICE officers. I think that also needs. It's not the case of her standing physically in front of an officer. It's not a case of her trying to drag a suspect away or prevent access to a suspect. Right. This was a woman who was basically sitting in her car.
Right. She was there just to protest.
And, quote, observe. This forum, I think, Mike, you and I can agree, took the form of her vehicle being at roughly a 90-degree angle to traffic and blocking, again, about half of the accessible roadway, I would say, right? Like, so if you kind of picture almost like a 2-lane road, her vehicle was perpendicular to traffic and kind of would have blocked one of the lanes, is the way I would describe it. I don't know.
Went backward and forward a couple of times to add just one extra layer of complexity to your
right.
story, but yeah.
So as this was going on, there was a series of ICE vehicles that were attempting to get by. The lead ICE vehicle, she kind of, you could see her in the video leading up to it, kind of waved them by, like, go by, go by. The first vehicle goes by. The second vehicle stops. And three ICE, I don't want to call them officers, 3 ICE agents come out and attempted to resolve the situation. So, Mike, now here's where I want your experience as a police officer to come in. And again, drawing the distinction between a police officer and an ICE agent, because I think these are 2 different jobs, right? It's like saying a Navy guy and an Air Force person, right? Like they might be somewhat related, but they're not exactly the same.
Not exactly the same.
Not exactly the same thing, right?
So tasks and training, but yeah.
Okay, so let's start out with that. So in that video, what, if anything, did you see that was done correctly, that was done incorrectly? Give us your assessment. Like if you were one of the 3 agents getting out of that vehicle, or why even did the second vehicle stop after the first one rolled through?
Yeah, well, that's all interesting questions. By the way, just a signal for what we're going to talk in 20 minutes, we're going to zoom out a little bit and talk about what the hell ICE was doing there in the first place.
Right.
Which is an important issue, not necessarily relevant for the legality of the shooting and so forth.
Right.
But, well, for starters, ICE did not have a lot of personnel there in order to control the crowd. So this situation is not completely under the level of control that as a police officer, you would want it to be, right? Slightly chaotic in the sense that you do have cars blocking ICE agents, right? DHS has been very adamant about the fact that the protesters were inhibiting ICE operations. That's all true. And it's not legal. It's not necessarily a felony, but you've got a car in the roadway, and it's going back and forth, letting certain cars through and trying to make up her mind. Renee Good is the driver, trying to make up her mind which cars to let by and that sort of thing. Okay, so she waves one car through, and then, as you said, the second ICE vehicle rolls up, and they decide, for whatever reason, they're fed up. This woman needs, at the very least, a traffic stop. I presume that based on the fact that I believe it was the driver, one of the officers approaches the vehicle and grabs the handle, right? I presume the intent is to take her into custody. We don't know that with certainty, but you're not grabbing someone's car door as a cop unless your intention is to place them under arrest, right? That's
Now,
not how you ask for license and registration.
Right. And the officer who grabbed the handle was not Jonathan Ross. It was not
Correct.
the ICE agent who ended up shooting Good.
Right.
And I think it's also,
Good
Mike,
point.
I don't mean to interrupt you as well.
No, this is good.
As they approach the vehicle, the three officers, explain to me, because I was a little confused as we all have studied these videos ad infinitum, right? The cops, the three approaching seem to issue conflicting orders to Good. Very clearly you hear, "Get the hell out of here," from one of the three. The other one of the three, maybe the one reaching for the handle, it's hard to tell who said what. You hear, "Get the hell out of the car."
Yeah, that's exactly right. And this goes to federal agents whose job it is to enforce immigration and customs, being stuck in a situation like fish out of water. They clearly don't know what they're doing. And I don't mean that to sound quite as disparaging as it might sound. They're just not trained for this.
Right. It's like asking an electrician to fix your plumbing, right?
And that's what it looks like. It looks like three electricians got out and tried to fix the plumbing on this car.
Right.
They just don't know what they're doing. First of all, if you're the backup officer, which is everyone but the driver, okay, which may not have been something that was discussed by federal agents because they just don't do a lot of traffic stops.
Right.
I'm guessing that this might have been the first traffic stop these three guys have ever done in their whole life, and maybe never even one in the academy. I don't know. But they look like they've never seen a car before. That's what they look like.
Right.
Who's ever the lead is the one who barks instructions. The other two shut the heck up. That's how this is supposed to work. The backup officers are supposed to position themselves on the other side of the car for safety.
You mean, so if the lead ICE agent...
The lead goes to the left side of the car.
Where the driver is.
The others go to the other side.
To the passenger side. Okay.
To the passenger side. Because there could be another person over there. In this case, there was. Because you've got a second view on the driver. Right? You never really know when a driver could be a dangerous person. Maybe they have a weapon, or maybe they're going to do something stupid. You want extra eyes on them. And if you have extra officers, you've got two backup officers, so you ought to have eyes all over that car.
Now, Mike, I also noticed that in your positioning advice, I didn't hear you say an officer should be standing either behind or in front of the vehicle.
Because you should be neither.
Fair enough.
Never stand behind a car. Never stand in front of a car. Cars go backward. Cars go forward. And neither one is a good day for you if you're standing in the path of the vehicle, right?
Fair enough.
This is the kind of thing that 9-year-olds learn from their parents, right? I think it's reiterated in the academy. I know I've told a lot of rookies this myself, but when you say this to a rookie officer, you're giggling a little bit, right? You're saying, "Look, Bob, let's not stand in front of the car. Let's not stand behind the car, because that would suck if the car started."
Let's not stick our hand over a flame. Yeah, I got you.
Right. You might be reminded not to burn your hand in the academy, but you learned this a whole lot of years earlier. Okay. Right. And that's because somebody might panic. Somebody might make a mistake. People all the time forget to put the car in park when they're pulled over by police officers because they panic a little bit, right?
Right.
You take your foot off the brake, all of a sudden that car is rolling.
Right. Yeah, you just don't want to be in the path of a moving vehicle. So you position yourself not to do that while still being able to do your job.
And that has nothing to do with presuming that the driver is a bad person. It's just for everybody's
It's
safety.
protocol. It's protocol. Okay.
It's protocol. Okay. The other thing you don't do is hold a cell phone in your hand.
Oh man, you got right to it. I didn't. It's a, and I think this isn't talked enough about. It's stunning to me that Ross. Now, I'm assuming I could be wrong here. I'm assuming that ICE agents have body cams,
and they don't.
And they don't. So why was somebody in the middle of, let's assume, an arrest in this case, right?
A traffic stop that looks like it's leading to an arrest.
Right. Is circling the vehicle, to your point, holding his cell phone, recording the event.
I can tell you why, because he didn't know that there was going to be an arrest made.
So you
thought the officer who approaches the driver's side door thinks he's going to place this woman under arrest.
Okay.
Ross doesn't think so.
So was he recording for what? Social media, to make one of those ICE videos for?
No, he's recording so that he can get the license plate. Remember, if you're pulling this person into custody, you're going to be there a half an hour. You can write down the license plate with a pen and paper.
See, so that's why I'm a little confused, right? Because
he thinks that this person is going to be released quickly, and therefore he wants to record. Now, if you're a local cop, you're on the radio, as ICE officers should be.
Okay.
There should be no such thing as a police officer who's not on the radio. That's, the radio is the second most important piece of equipment you have after your weapon. You should be on the radio saying, Romeo Echo, Sierra Tango, Romeo Echo, Alpha Mike. This is a Minnesota plate. I'm just reading your branding up here. Sure. And have dispatch come back and say, or teletype, whoever is on the other end of that radio, come back and say, it's all clear, as opposed to this car is owned by someone with a felony warrant for murdering cops, which is what you really want to know, right?
Right.
And so you run that tag, and then the cell phone should be put away. The cell phone never should have come out. But at least I get it. I understand, right? He's trying to record the plate because he thinks the car is about to leave and he's not going to have time to write it down. Okay, at least I get that. Bad idea, but I get it. Put the cell phone away and move to the right-hand side of the car because you're the backup officer. But he doesn't do that. He goes around to the front of the car, subjecting himself to the potentiality of being run over. Bad idea.
Right. So, and when he moves to the front of the car, he's still holding his cell phone. He's still recording.
Layering bad idea on top of bad idea.
Right. Now, at this point, you've got three ICE agents.
Yeah, I don't know. The third one's not adding a lot of value in this.
He's not adding a lot of value. He seems to be standing again on the driver's side, but perhaps a little bit out of frame behind, or barely in frame behind the officer who's trying to get Renee Good out.
Right.
So at this point,
by the way, we're going to go through what the driver did and what the other person did too, because they're not covering themselves in glory either. They screwed this whole thing up, but we'll get to that in a minute.
Yeah. I was just about to lead into that, right? So one of the things that I want to ask you now, because just more of a verification, validation, which is you've got, say, two of the three ICE officers acting in a, what I assume from what you just said, reasonable manner during this attempted stop/arrest, right? And you've got one officer acting not in a malicious manner, but in a not typically following protocol for this type of situation. Is
the
that
way I would say it is not well trained?
well trained. All right. So
We're
he's
not going to
acting.
use the word reasonable because it's a term of art that's going to be real important in a few minutes.
Fair enough. So you've got two officers acting according to training they should have had, and you've got one.
No. They're not either. They're just not as bad as Ross.
Fair enough. Okay. Now at
For
this point,
example,
sure. Go ahead. Yeah.
why would you put your hand on the handle of a car?
Oh, to
Because
drag
you want a
someone out.
broken wrist or
Oh,
because,
right.
right?
Yeah.
You're asking someone to get out of the car. Ask them to get out of the car. Go ahead, approach the car and ask them to get out. If she says no, you say, no, I really mean it. And you explain why it's important. I'm not convinced it is, but
Yeah.
never mind that. He apparently wants her out of the car. Okay. He senses that she's not having it, either because of something she said or she's not motioning, right?
Mm,
So he appears to reach inside through the window
right.
because he wants apparently two broken wrists. One isn't enough. He really wants to break both of his hands.
Right.
Bad idea on top of a bad idea. By the way, can we zoom out just 1 second or go back a few seconds in this story? Why is he asking her to get out of the car? Why is he placing her under arrest? The reason I mentioned that they don't have the scene under complete control is because that's not the time to make arrests, right? Let me exaggerate the situation. If you and I were the only two cops and you've got 100 people there and they're all mad at us, and someone misbehaves in a way that you and I decide, oh boy, they got to go to jail. Really? Really?
Right.
Now you and I are going to preoccupy our time and our focus and our view on this one person, and the other 99 people who are mad at us are going to, now they're going to be twice as mad at us. And you think that's a safe situation?
Well, I think you just made a great point, and I was going to tease it out a little more fully, but I will might as well get into it. As you said, a local cop or cops in that situation, either due to their training, common sense, or sense of community, take your combination of any of those things, would have said, this essentially amounts to a traffic violation. Essentially, right? That if you're going to fine her friend, she'll probably get a ticket. This is not a felony. It's like you're blocking traffic.
Yeah, even if it were, is my point.
No, exactly. So
even if it were even if you had yourself convinced this was felony obstruction,
right.
I'm still not getting out of that car when that chaos is enveloping us, so
Right.
that I can arrest some woman in an SUV who's blocking traffic.
But exactly. But I'm saying that you're right, but compound it with the fact that this was, again, my unlearned opinion of seeing the situation, was nothing more than a non-moving traffic violation. They have her license plates. Apparently, Ross videotaped her. They have what she looks like. At that point, wouldn't you just de-escalate the situation by saying, you're blocking the road, get out of here? You and
Yes,
your wife,
it
get
is
out of here.
worse than a non-moving traffic violation. It's worth passing on the information to the detective bureau, whatever the equivalent is in ICE, and having them make the decision. Is it worth going out and arresting her tomorrow or next week or next month or next year? That's a judgment call based on resources and
Right.
what kind of signal you're trying to send the community. But that's a decision that can be made later. You're right. At the very least, you have a mental picture of what she looks like. You know what the license plate is. You know what the vehicle is. All of this should have been described on the radio, but I don't think it was. And then you tell the person to get the heck out of there, which is what one of the three agents, I think, was probably trying. Hard to tell, but I think one of the three agents was trying to communicate exactly that. The driver of the ICE vehicle was trying to take her into custody, and the third guy has decided to stand in front of the car.
Right. Okay. So we've kind of now talked
With
about
one hand on the phone.
Right. With the ICE agents, we've kind of described them, put them in, and I think both of us can agree not handle in the best of manner. Now let's talk about the driver, Renee Good. It,
Yes.
she clearly did not. She put herself also in a compromised position, right? One is by using her vehicle to impede traffic. Under the best of circumstances, that you could say she used her vehicle as a form of protest to impede traffic. Uh, Mike, what should she have done? What could she have done better? I mean, obviously she's been killed, so anything might have been better. But at this point, how would you say if I found myself in that position?
Every decision she made that day was the wrong one.
Talk about it.
If you're going to protest the decision makers. The decision makers were not at that scene. It does nobody any good for you to be protesting officers in a local operation. No good can come of that.
Okay.
If you're upset with the administration, write a letter, call your congressman, call the senator, call your radio station, go to Washington and protest. If you feel that your local officials are not doing enough to stand up for your interests, then protest them. The mayor in Chicago, what we would have called aldermen, whoever your local officials are, the governor, protest outside the governor's mansion. If you believe that the decision makers for that agency are in town, right? If there's a local ICE office or federal law enforcement office, protest there. That might make some sense. You've got a lot of options.
Mm.
But protesting at the scene of a police operation is inherently ineffective and dangerous and illegal, depending on your actions. Standing 100 feet away and screaming may sound like nothing more than exercising your First Amendment right. But if you're, by virtue of causing such calamity, inhibiting officers from conducting their business in a legal way, you're breaking the law while simultaneously wasting your time. So none of that is a good idea. But okay, so we've made these bad ideas, we've made these bad decisions, and here we are. So you've decided to stay in your vehicle and block traffic. Again, this is one of those things you learn when you're 9 years old, but you're reminded when you get your driver's license. Don't stand in the street. Don't stand in the street with your car. What happens? Let me make up a story that didn't happen, thank God. What happens if those two ICE vehicles get dispatched and they're in a hurry? They're headed down the street at a little bit of a clip now, right? I don't know what the speed limit is on that street, but let's say they exceed the speed limit. Let's say they're going 45 miles an hour, which maybe they shouldn't have been doing, but cops have been known to go fast.
Right.
What if they're headed down the street and the second vehicle doesn't have a view in front of the first vehicle? And the first vehicle at the last second swerves out of the way, goes around the front of the SUV, and the second car slams into it, killing both Renee Good and the person standing on the other side of the car by virtue of shoving that vehicle into her. Now we got two dead people and whatever happens to the cops inside of the second ICE vehicle. Do not block traffic with a car. It's not a good idea. Aside from it being illegal, it's dangerous to you and to everybody else. What happens if the ICE vehicle swerves? Because remember that Renee was driving back and forth. She wasn't just stationary the whole time. What if the ICE vehicle swerves and hits somebody? Another protester who's standing in the street, for example.
Right.
Bad day. Can't have it. Do not block traffic. Nothing to do with the fact that you're blocking officers. That just makes it a different crime.
Right.
But if you're pissed off, right, about anything that does not give you the right, nor does it make it a good idea to block traffic with your vehicle at a perpendicular. Okay, so we've made these mistakes.
Mike, before you continue,
Yep.
let me play devil's advocate here. I agree with you, by the way. It's a stupid idea. I would never tell a friend or a relative to go do the same thing. But I could see where protesters would be. Isn't that part of civil disobedience? In the sense that I agree blocking traffic is not ideal, but I'm willing to accept the charges because that's part of civil disobedience. Now resources have to be spent to arrest me, to take
Yep.
me down to the county jail or whatever, to have me booked.
Yep.
I'm willing to take the fine and the 15 days because that's the punishment for what I did. I'm just making that up. That's what Gandhi did. That's been proven a peaceful civil disobedience. How would
Yes.
you answer that?
Gandhi didn't block traffic with an SUV. There's a difference between civil disobedience and presenting danger
Mm,
to your fellow Americans. And that's an important distinction. Civil disobedience is chaining yourself to the gate of the factory, right?
okay.
You make yourself a pain in the neck. Someone has to drag you away. Uh, Maybe you're doing a sit-in at the university president's office. You're making yourself a pain in the neck. Someone has to drag you away. That's civil disobedience, and it comes in lots of flavors. And I don't begrudge those who are a bigger pain in the neck than that.
Okay.
That's it's illegal, but if you're willing to pay the price, at least I understand it. I wouldn't recommend it in most situations, but
Right.
I get it. Whereas standing in a street with cars moving, bad idea.
Yeah. Okay.
Screaming at officers while they're conducting business, bad idea. I can tell you, having been a cop for 11 and a half years, officers' ability to communicate with each other in real time, in geographic proximity of each other, is a matter of safety. If I can't hear my partner, I've got a problem. And if it's because you're screaming, that makes it your problem, and that attaches criminal liability. In addition to the fact that no good comes of yelling at police officers who did not make the decision to be there.
Right. Right.
So
Okay.
she's
Okay.
blocking traffic. Okay, I get it. The officers get out and say, "Get out of here, get out of the car." If a police officer tells you to get out of the car, my strong advice is to get out of the car. I don't think it's possible to claim that she didn't know that that lead officer was asking her to get out of the car. Maybe
What?
she did, maybe she did hear the other officer say, "Get out of here." And maybe, you put all that in the blender and you decide, the advice of Officer B was better than the advice of Officer A. I'm
Right.
going to get out of here. I get that. I think that's wholly rational. And so she decides to get out of there and pulls the now infamous 2-point turn,
Right.
backing up, turning the wheels, and trying to exit.
Right. So I understand what you meant, and I'm glad you acknowledge that. And let me just preface this by saying my rule of thumb is the scene of something like that is not the time to argue constitutional liberties and constitutional rights. That comes for later. That comes after you've
That's
gotten
what
yourself.
courts are for.
That's what courts are for. And by the way,
And
that
while
applies.
cops are well versed on the Constitution, and if they're any good, they understand very well their role
Right.
against the Constitution, they are neither attorneys nor are they in court standing in that street.
Agreed, 100%. So that's not the time to adjudicate anything. So let me
Right.
preface everything by saying that. But is again, you tell me from your experience and your training, was it unexpected to those ICE agents, given the situation, given the person behind the wheel, not to become sexist about it, but a frightened young lady,
A frightened
uh,
human.
a frightened human behind the car,
At the very least, a human out of his or her element, right? We
Right.
can assume that this is not something they do every day.
Right. And I'm being honest, I'm also talking about the physical disparity of three hefty male ICE agents surrounding an unarmed female. I mean, we could talk about egalitarianism, but there is a physical disparity where she may have felt into. We're talking about the mindset of the officers a lot. I don't hear too much about the mindset of the driver. So it would.
Agreed. Not to mention the fact that by virtue of her protesting, she's signaling to us, to you and me, after the
Right.
fact, that she probably did. I don't want to put words in her mouth.
Right.
I'm guessing she didn't like the way ICE went about their business. And
Right.
one of the
Right.
things that ICE has been criticized for is being too aggressive.
Right. So
Okay, so it's completely
what
reasonable for us to think that she would expect ICE to be overly aggressive in this situation, and this would bias her actions toward wanting to leave.
right. The question I was going to ask you along those lines is, should the ICE agents have expected that she might try to book out of there when they surrounded her vehicle? I'm not putting blame on the ICE agents. I'm saying, was it something that was, I don't want to use the word reasonable in this situation, was it something they should have and could have
Been prepared for.
been prepared for? Yeah.
Every local cop who's ever been on the street as much as 1 year has seen vehicles leave a would-be traffic stop. It happens all the time.
Okay.
In
Okay.
other words, not standing in front of a car isn't just a good rule in case it comes up in the next few hundred years. No, it
Right.
happens all the time.
Right.
So if you're given to standing in front of vehicles on traffic stops, you're going to get run over. Maybe not today, maybe not tomorrow, but as Humphrey Bogart said, soon and for the rest of your life.
Okay. Now, if that's the case, again, I ask you as a police officer, which may, again, I don't know, may not apply to ICE agents because of their training and their background, but I'm asking you, in your experience, what is the response that you're at a traffic stop and the driver decides to, I'm gonna book out of here, I'm gonna peel out of here. You followed your training up until that point. You're not standing in front or behind of the vehicle, let's assume. What is the typical response if you're a law enforcement officer when at a traffic stop, the person you're trying to arrest or cite or whatever decides to peel out? What's the standard typical response the police officer should have in that situation?
Get the hell out of the way. Give them a wide berth. Laterally, front, rear, stand back.
You're saying let them peel out is what you're saying.
Oh, absolutely. What's your alternative?
Well, we saw an alternative in
Well,
Minnesota.
we saw an alternative. That wasn't just because she was trying to leave. Well, we'll tease that out.
Right.
But there is no good alternative. You could try to block them with your car, and cops do that all the time, and mayors get upset because it's expensive.
Right.
Because cars get bumped.
Damaged. Yeah.
They get damaged. And trust me, local garages like to charge municipalities a lot of money for fixing a fender bender, and they don't want officers doing it themselves. Have I ever fixed a dent in my own police car without telling my boss? Of course I have.
Right.
But that was typically because, I bumped into a lamppost or bumped into his car and I didn't feel like telling him.
Right.
Look, you get the heck out of the way. You're on the radio with the license plate. You're letting people know. And then there's two categories. One is three categories. One is this is a traffic stop. It's a misdemeanor.
Right.
I don't want to say no big deal. I don't like to pretend like we should be tolerating crime, but it's not the kind of thing you want to set your hair on fire over. You're not gonna
Gotcha.
you're not gonna follow,
Right.
especially in a street full of protesters, a chaotic situation. You've got problems with crowd control. you're not even in that situation. You're not even. I would not advise even following.
Mm.
Right. I would recommend submitting all the information to your coworker, your boss, whoever is going to make the decision the next day, and they can decide whether to go out and arrest her or not. I'm guessing it wouldn't even be worth that.
Right. Okay.
Okay. Now, the second category is you've decided this is felonious behavior, right? This is felony obstruction, and this person has to go to jail. Okay. You could follow if it's safe to do so. You are not chasing. Big difference between follow and chase.
Mm.
You can follow, observing all the traffic laws. You stop at the stop sign. You do not speed. You do not make an illegal lane change. And if she puts too much distance between you and herself because she's driving too fast, that's just the way that it goes. Third category, this is a fleeing felon who's violent. And you're
Presents a danger to other people at this point, you're saying.
or recently committed a violent felony and they need to go to jail.
Gotcha. Okay.
Right? They robbed the bank at gunpoint and they're taken off. It's on like Donkey Kong.
Right.
Right? We chase for that. We do not chase for property crimes. We do not chase for annoying obstruction. We do not chase for running a stop sign.
Mm.
You chase for violent felonies only. Most police agencies won't even let you chase for a stolen car because that's a property crime.
Right.
Right? Okay. So has she committed a violent felony? Obviously not. Has she committed a felony? Judgment call, depending on federal statute and what you think that she's actually actively done here. But you're stepping away from that vehicle, stepping way away from that vehicle. Your primary concern at that point is not getting hurt, which brings us to Officer Ross is the unfortunate situation of having only one hand and having positioned himself in front of a car at a traffic stop of a SUV being driven by someone who is a fish out of water under enormous stress.
Right.
And she decides that she's going to leave, at least in part because one of the officers sounds like he's making that suggestion, maybe because she's panicked, maybe because she doesn't want to get arrested. For whatever reason, she's decided to put that car in gear, or maybe it already was in reverse. I didn't see the tail lights, but she backs up, she puts it in forward, and she turns the wheels to the right. Importantly, we need to mention at this point, we have no way of asserting that the officer at the front of the car was aware of most of that. We have no way of asserting that he knew she was turning the wheel to the right. We have no way of asserting that he knew which way the wheels were pointed. We really can't even assert that we know that he heard the engine revving, right? He knew that it was in motion and that it was headed toward him and he's in a bad spot. That's about all we can really assert with confidence. You know, a lot of bad decisions that have led him to be in this situation. But let this not be the first time I say this. We do not prosecute people for being bad at their jobs, right? Per se, being bad at their jobs. And you do not give up your right to self-defense just because you're a police officer. And you do not give up your right to self-defense just because you're bad at your job.
Now, let me ask you a little bit more about that. And again, I'm playing dime store
No, all
lawyer
good.
here, if anything. Is the claim of self-defense lost if you knowingly put yourself in a position
No.
of danger. Okay.
It's
I seem
lost if
to
you can be deemed the aggressor. There's a big
gotcha.
difference. In other words, there's a bad guy over there. He's got a gun. I go over
Right.
there and tell him, this is my property, not yours. I want you to holster your weapon and leave. He then decides to point the gun at me. I have not lost my right to defend myself.
Gotcha.
On the other hand, if I go over there not knowing whether he has a gun or not, or maybe I know that he has a gun, but it's holstered, right? I go over there and I say,
Mhm.
this is my property, not yours. Get out of Dodge. And I point a gun at him. He panics. He unholsters his weapon and points it at me. It's going to be real hard for me to claim at that point I shot him in self-defense, because he was defending
Gotcha.
himself against me by pointing the gun at me.
Gotcha. Gotcha. And I don't disagree with you. If in that split second, even though I think the mishandling of the situation resulted in this tragedy on both ends.
Yeah.
Like
Yep.
again, it's a tragedy. I certainly understand Ross in that split second saying she's trying to hit me with this car. But Mike, in your mind, is there a distinction with she's trying to hit me with this car, or this car will hit me? If you understand,
It's
the
a
distinction
huge
I'm trying to make.
distinction, and it is the distinction that is interesting to a lot of the public. It doesn't necessarily matter, and it absolutely does not matter in my mind or your mind. It only matters in his. The way the law works, and in my view, the way the law ought to work, by the way. This is the kind of
Right.
thing that's been adjudicated in case law for a couple of 100 years in this country. And all of this is hard, right? No one should suggest that the job of lawyers and lawmakers and judges is an obviously easy task, and this was decided a million years ago, and anyone who disagrees is an idiot. That's not how this works. But the way that we have developed our understanding of how the law should work is that what matters is in the mind of the person you are considering prosecuting. So if if you and I are now switching from a discussion of training and good policing to a discussion of should we criminally prosecute him, it's a very different discussion, right? Because it's one thing to be bad at your job.
Right.
Your boss is mad at you. Maybe you even get fired. Maybe you get disciplined. Maybe your behavior was not all that bad. It's just, teasing at roll call the next day. But there's a big difference between being bad at your job, violating training, screwing up, and doing something criminal.
It's the difference between being civilly liable for negligence or incompetence and being criminally negligible at
Yes,
your job.
that is an important distinction. And typically, even if you're bad at your job, you're not always opening yourself up to civil liability either. This is where qualified immunity comes in. Qualified immunity does not
Ugh.
pertain to criminal law. It is typically reserved
Right.
For civil, and we do not say we typically do not say that police officers are civilly liable unless, for violating someone's rights, unless we can demonstrate that they really screwed up. They should have known better. And that's a whole nother
Right. And
conversation.
qualified immunity, yeah, that's a whole other episode
Yeah.
that we should do about whether or not we should have qualified immunity. But the reason I ask this is because, and we're going to slowly transition from the facts and the law that we've been talking about to the politics very quickly, because I want to save 10 minutes for that. But as we sort of transition, to me, that's also interesting because earlier in the show we said let's avoid using the word reasonable because that becomes a very incendiary
Well, it's a
word
term.
in
It's a
this
legal term
situation.
of art, and
It's a legal term,
it's
right?
about to matter. You and I are going to discuss the criminality element here, and that's on which this whole thing turns.
Right. So part of the self-defense when juries are asked, in my understanding, is to the word reasonable because it's never. I mean, what you said earlier is true about the individual, but it's also like, would a reasonable individual in that situation, would they have also feared?
Let
Because
me
that
let me
also
hop
plays
in
into it.
here because this is
Sure.
razor thin nuance. The test of whether or not someone is criminally liable is not what a reasonable person would do. It is, could such action have been taken by someone who was acting reasonably? In other
Okay.
words, we're
Fair
not
enough.
allowed to say, John, you're reasonable, I'm reasonable, and we wouldn't have done that. So therefore, he's got to go to jail. That's
Right.
not how this works. All of which might be true, right? Or
Right.
might not be true, but you're not allowed as a juror to say, gee, I think of myself as a reasonable person. There's just no way I would have done that. You know, I would rather have been hit by a car. I would have rather lost my life than pull that trigger.
Right.
Or I would have rather taken my chances. Or I think I really should have stepped out of the way, and that's what my focus should have been instead of pulling that trigger. Or I'm a reasonable person, and I don't think pulling that trigger would have improved my chances of survival all that much or at all.
Right.
And so therefore I wouldn't have
Right.
pulled the trigger. All of which is, every one of those things is a reasonable thing to think, right? Which is why this case is so incendiary, because lots of reasonable people are looking at what happened saying, I wouldn't have done that. And maybe you wouldn't have, maybe you would have. No one knows how they would react in these situations just because you're looking at it 3 days later with a cup of coffee in your hand.
Oh yeah.
It's
It's hindsight
hindsight.
for us,
Nobody
and we're
knows what
not.
they would do, but let's
Yeah.
say you're right. And you are a reasonable person. I don't know by what authority you get to claim you're reasonable, but I mean, John, you
Right.
and I know that you and I are the only reasonable people.
Of course,
And
everybody
they're
else
all
is
crazy out
unreasonable.
there.
And I'm glad you used that word because I'm going to use it as a segue, right? Part of the politics of all this, but what was stated very clearly, and there's video of what I'm about to say, Ross had been in the field in that situation, but he's been traumatized. And this is according to both the vice president, J.D. Vance, and Kristi Noem, who in the aftermath of this said, hey, listen, this ICE agent, this brave warrior, was in fear for his life. He reacted reasonably. And let's not forget, in a similar situation in June of 2025, he was rammed and dragged by another criminal, illegal immigrant, and therefore he's traumatized. So, he's got this hair trigger. And if you look at that video, it's also something that I think as a police officer you'd shudder at, which was he shattered the rear windshield of a vehicle where there was a bad dude driving at a stop, tried to pull him out by dragging him out from the back. The guy steps on the gas. He's now half in, half out from the rear window while the guy is driving, tases him twice. When you tase someone and they're driving, I'm assuming you could expect them to do this with the wheel. Ross gets shaken off, gets 33 stitches, serious injuries, no laughing matter. He got hurt, okay? My question is there someone who should have said this guy shouldn't be in the field? Is there someone that and by the way, I am fully pragmatic in saying there's no way in hell this guy gets convicted of anything criminal in this. Whether he gets charged or not by the state of Minnesota, we'll see. But what is he responding reasonably given his acknowledged trauma that the vice president and Noem stated he was under? Is it also fair? One quick thing. Is it also fair that the other two ICE agents never even unholstered their weapons in the same, not exactly the same situation, But during the same incident, not one of them, if you look at the video, even motioned towards their guns, towards their weapons. They backed off, as you suggested someone in that situation might. So when you take it all, Mike, I'm saying not just Ross himself, but when you take the situation as a whole, how do you interpret the reasonableness of
All
the
interesting
actions of Ross?
points, none relevant.
Gotcha.
None
Okay,
relevant.
why is nothing
Although a
relevant there?
powerful argument for the vice president and the DHS secretary to shut the hell up. That's what your argument really says, but that's another.
That's a different story.
We will get to those
gotcha,
two. We're not letting those two off the hook, nor are we letting the governor or the
No.
mayor off the hook. Those four we will deal with
Right.
momentarily.
Yes.
Look, the behavior of the other officers is not relevant here because they're not in the same situation, and because, as I mentioned before, because they don't have the same view, they're not facing the same risk, they have different background against what they're going to be shooting at. They may have been slower to react, and maybe they screwed up. For all these reasons, what they did is irrelevant. What really matters is in the mind of the shooter, the mind of the shooter that you are considering criminally prosecuting. So a moment ago, we were emphasizing the point that it's not a matter of what a reasonable person would do. It's a matter of, can the prosecutor prove beyond a reasonable doubt that it is impossible for his action in pulling that trigger to reflect a reasonable mindset. That's a pretty high bar to clear.
It's an extremely high bar.
Because you've got to demonstrate not that a reasonable person might have acted differently or a reasonable person would have acted differently. You have to demonstrate that no reasonable person would have done that. And reasonable people react in very different ways under strange and difficult and challenging and murky and complex situations. I would like to think that as a local cop who's been in a lot of traffic stops, a local cop who's been in a lot of use of force situations, who, in a day gone by, John, I was pretty good on my feet. I would have taken my chances trying to get the hell out of the way of that vehicle if it were moving, right? I would like to think that I wouldn't have gone for the gun. And if I had gone for the gun, I wouldn't have pulled the trigger. But can I guarantee that I wouldn't have? That's a high bar to clear. Can I guarantee that there's just no such thing as a reasonable and reasonably trained police officer who would not, under any given 10 times, would not once have taken that course of action? That's a very high bar to clear. And for that reason, I don't think it's likely that a criminal prosecution would be sustained in a guilty verdict for his behavior. And two more things. One you brought up. Let me dispense with the other one first. It looks like the gun comes out earlier than he could have realized the car was moving forward. That's my recollection. I could be wrong about that, but my combination of recollection and observation is that.
And let me say this, in perhaps a shocking moment for you. I did see those video analysis. I do agree with you. It seems like he unholstered his weapon while the car was in reverse or stopped. But that's by doing a frame-by-frame analysis. So to give him as much maximum benefit of the doubt in this situation, I don't think at that point, when he actually reached for it,
it wasn't coming forward.
It
wasn't yet coming forward.
It wasn't coming forward.
Let me put it this way, because we're about to get into an element of psychology that's really relevant. The decision to pull out his gun.
Yes, came before it was coming at him. I agree 100%.
So this is relevant to a criminal prosecution. and to his training and whether or not he did a good job. The reason he pulls out his gun is not because he thinks the car is about to run over him. Now, it may be because he thinks she might be fixing to decide, and he's going to use
Right.
his gun to change her mind.
Brandish it? Would that be the right
Brandishes the
word? He's
weapon
brandishing his.
to make sure that she
Right.
doesn't have any stupid thoughts about trying to run people over. That's not completely unreasonable. Not a good idea, but not completely without some reason. Like, you can articulate that reason, right? You can argue against
Right.
it. You can say it's a bad idea, but you cannot assert there's no reasonability attachable to that concept. Okay, so he
Fair
brandishes the
enough.
weapon either to discourage her from coming forward, or if he's really convinced that she's going to come forward, to stop her from coming forward, or, which I believe is the truth, I don't know, this is all in his head, so I'm guessing, but my guess is he brandishes the weapon to help effectuate the arrest. When he realizes she doesn't want to go to jail, she's moving the car instead. My buddy
Mm,
is at risk. He's about to have 2 broken wrists, right? Again, bad training, bad idea, shouldn't have done it, but he did do it.
right.
He's got one hand on the handle,
Right.
one hand inside the car. The car is moving. I need to stop this. How am I going to stop it? I brandish my weapon to get her to stop. Again, maybe not a good idea, but not without some
Right.
potential reasonability. Okay. Then the car comes forward. Now he needs to make the decision whether or not to pull the trigger. We're going to assume, to go back and forth here a little bit, we're going to assume that she doesn't realize she's going to get shot by putting it forward, right? She
Sure.
misperceives the
Yeah.
situation also. Okay, but she decides to go forward. Now, she knows she's turning the car to the right, so she's guessing she's going to miss him. By the way, I frankly can't tell with 100% certainty whether he gets touched with the car or not. I don't know if anyone else can.
There's been some, again, there's, when you look at different angles, one angle
Yeah.
does appear that he got hit, and I think it's the angle from his
Yeah.
own cell phone, which surprisingly somehow didn't get handed over as evidence, but
Oh,
it's
I gotta
all over
believe
the
it
internet,
will.
so that's
As you and I
yeah.
discussed a couple days ago, the big reason you don't use your phone is because if anything happens, your evidence tech is coming out there saying, "Give me your phone," and then you got no phone for
And that-
you got to go and to Verizon and get a new phone.
Plus, everything else is open to investigation there too.
Right.
But that aside,
All of a sudden, everyone finds out in the police department. Everyone finds out you got 2 different girlfriends, and one of them is the boss's wife. And oh my god,
right. Gotcha, right. But in when they synced up the videos, meaning, you know how they do in a football game where they go, if they're going to overturn it, they take 5 angles and they synchronize them. Somebody did that. I think it was the New York Times did that. And if you go again, this is maximum nerdness, frame by frame, synchronized videos. It does not appear that he got hit by the car. It seems like, he kind of sort of like used the car to push off against, and that's the thud you hear. But it doesn't seem like he got clipped. It doesn't seem, because it's also where he lands afterwards too. The physics of it is he wasn't turned or anything.
Well, that's true. Although it may be a distinction without an important difference, in the sense that if someone's I'm making this up, this may not be what happened. If someone's coming at you with a car, and in order to get out of the way, you push yourself off of the car, and it turns out you're okay, the driver doesn't get to say, "Hey, no harm, no foul." Nor if that maneuver winds up in you breaking your wrist by virtue of having shoved off that car really hard, the driver doesn't get to say, "Well, you broke your wrist. I didn't."
No. Well, I agree with you. It's just the
Agreed.
severity of it.
Agreed.
I
And
don't
that's why
think
it may
that
not
he
be all
got
that
hit.
important whether or not he got hit by the car. Clearly, if we
Yeah.
can't tell whether he got hit by the car, that does mean the car was in a position that could have hit. It's not unreasonable for him to think he's going to
I
get hit
agree.
by the car.
I agree
Okay.
with you
So,
100%. But
no, I was going to
go
say, so
ahead.
he decides to pull the trigger. Now,
Mm.
understand that when you decide to pull the trigger, you're making a decision that's going to last for a couple of seconds. This is important because the decision you're making is not to pull the trigger once. The decision that you're making is to pull the trigger until the threat stops.
Was going to be my next question to you, because I said to myself, even if I understood the first shot, which again, granted, I could see where someone in a situation like that could make the reasonable decision, even though, again, I don't think it was the right one to pull the shoot. What about shots 2 and 3 that
Yeah.
went through the
Nobody is
open
going to want to hear
driver
this.
window?
People are
Okay,
going to hate my guts for saying it, but I feel
sure.
obliged to tell you the truth.
Absolutely. That's why
The
I'm asking.
truth
I want
is
people to
that
understand
there's
the.
no such thing as someone who's well trained deciding to pull the trigger once. That's just
Fair
not a
enough.
thing. Someone breaks into your house, you shoot them, the police come and say, "How many times did you pull the trigger?" The most common answer is, "I don't know." The second most common answer is, "Until the slide got stuck in the rear position because I was out of ammo." The third most
Right.
common answer is a number approximately half of the real number. "I think I shot him twice." Well, it turns out you unloaded an entire clip, right?
Right.
Because what
Gotcha.
you're trying to do is stop that person. And in the case of law enforcement officers, you're trained to stop the threat. You're trained to
Right.
understand that one bullet does not effectuate. So you need to pull the trigger until the threat stops. So when you decide to pull the trigger, you're making a decision that's going to last for a couple of seconds. You want that office, we all want that officer to be making this decision every few hundredths of a second. But that's not reality. That's just not how human beings work, unfortunately. I'm not trying to say something disparaging about this particular officer. I'm saying that human beings don't have the capacity to make such refined decisions. Either you're pulling the trigger or you're not. And if you are, you're going to pull it
Okay.
multiple times as long as the initial threat was substantial. If you're trying to kill a squirrel in the backyard, you might say to yourself, "I'm only going to need to pull the trigger once," and you may have committed to that. Fine. If you're target shooting and your boss says, "Pull the trigger once," you pull the trigger once. But in a real life situation where there's a threat, you're pulling the trigger until, for some other external input, you've decided the threat is no longer existential. So when he makes that decision to pull the trigger, that's going to last at least a couple of shots, notwithstanding the fact that the angle is changing. I don't want to say it's
Right.
irrelevant, but the fact that the angle is changing, you look at other cases, it's I don't want to make a statistical argument here, but it is not unheard of for a change in the angle of the shot to be the sort of thing that changes an officer's mind about continuing to pull the trigger.
Okay. I got you. That. Okay. So it's reasonable again that he fired those
Not
second shots.
good,
But
bad, because there
I
could be
got you.
people on
I
the
got
other
you. But
side of that
reasonable.
car now who are getting shot as he shoots
Sure.
through the car.
Yeah.
Again, one of the reasons why your training says don't shoot moving vehicles, let
Let
them
him go.
go.
Right.
And explicitly, most local agencies and certainly federal agencies have training and protocols that say don't shoot into a moving vehicle. just one of the reasons, besides the fact that it doesn't work, it doesn't stop the threat. One of the reasons is as that angle changes, the background changes. You don't have time to evaluate it. And Lord only knows how many kids are on the other side of that car that you're now shooting.
Right, especially as you said, in the middle of a mass protest
Exactly.
like that. Okay, very quickly, because I don't want to spend too much more time. I wanted to spend 10 minutes on the politics, but let me ask you very quickly: what do you make of the situation after the shooting, where there's video of a physician trying to get to Good, ICE agents prevent him from going to render assistance? Also reports that ambulances were not allowed to approach Good, that they were made to stop a distance away, and that the paramedics or the healthcare responders had to walk a relatively long distance to get there. It doesn't make ICE look good. Again, Mike, is that part of the protocol? Is that not part of the protocol? Is it just a bad optic? Did they F up?
I think all those things are true. It's typical protocol, and they screwed up by following it so anal retentively. You do have to control the scene. You do have to try to render aid. The shooter is going to, Ross, is going to try to make the case that he rendered aid by approaching the vehicle, realizing she needed medical attention, and then telling his buddy to call 911.
Which he did.
He's going to say that that was sufficient. As someone who has done CPR in the middle of a highway more than once, while vehicles are zooming back and forth, I can tell you, you don't have to be Superman to take matters into your own hands when you need to. Having said that, I've never been in his situation where you've just shot someone, everyone's screaming at you, and now you've got to make the decision about how much medical aid to render yourself. I would like to think that 99 out of 100 local police officers would have been doing CPR themselves, even if they were the ones pulling the trigger. But basic training is you get the heck out of there. You extricate yourself from the situation, that no good can come from you staying on scene.
Which he was whisked
away. So we get that, and you need to control the scene. This is a crime scene. You need to control the scene. We typically say that we only compromise the scene in order to try to save someone's life, which is why you let fire rescue in there, the ambulance, right? Now, what do you do about the situation where someone is claiming to be a doctor? This is a very gray area. It's obviously I shouldn't say obviously, but it's typically viewed as a judgment call. Do you want to compromise the control of that crime scene in order to take a chance on saving her life? Or, to put this in a political context, at least look like you're trying to make an effort, right? I didn't see any cops even looking like they were making an effort.
No, it was at best, it was like we did our statutory responsibility by
that's
calling
exactly what it
911.
looked like. Now, in fairness, let's add a couple of thoughts to this. I wasn't there. I don't know what it looked like. You get where I'm going?
Sure. Was there a wave?
Well, I don't know what it looked like inside that car. I don't know what she looked like.
You mean, was it obvious that she had already passed?
Is it obvious that she had already passed? This might matter. Now, legally speaking, police officers are not allowed to pronounce time of death. I've done a lot of CPR on dead people. And fire rescue went so far as to tease me about it. Gee, Mike, you do a lot of CPR on a lot of dead people lately. Well, okay, but it's better than winding up in
You're
court.
Not a doctor. Yeah.
Because I just decided there was no chance, right? and so I would like to think that a reasonable cop would jump in there and at the least do CPR. Maybe you're trying to stop the hemorrhaging. I just don't know what it looked like. There are cases when it's fairly obvious, one way or another. So we're going to have to pass on that. But first observation is that it was handled in a disappointing fashion.
Okay. I want to move on in the interest of time. We said earlier we're going to talk about the politics, the optics of this. We mentioned 4 people: the vice president, the head of Homeland Security, the mayor, and the governor.
Yeah.
Break them off into pairs, Mike, and talk to me about it.
Let's start with the Chrissy JD pair first. Thou shalt not open thy mouth if you. First of all, she said things she couldn't possibly know to be true. Secondly, she said them in a way that suggested that what she was saying was not true. I don't think she was trying to be dishonest. I think she, inartfully ran a couple of sentences together. It made it look like she was trying to be dishonest. I'm not going there. But she couldn't possibly know that the things that she was saying were either true or false. She was way out ahead of her skis.
Give us an example.
The cop was justified. The driver was committing an act of domestic terrorism. He had to defend himself. I get why you might think so, right? I'm not saying that what she was saying wasn't reasonable. It was reasonable, but she couldn't possibly know them to be true. Even if she did know them to be true in her mind. By the way, if she thinks she knows they're true, she's really bad at her job. Okay, but even if she really does think that she knows these things to be true and decides to open her mouth, she's bad at her job for a different reason. She's biasing the investigation, biasing a potential trial.
Right.
Why? Why are you doing this? Now, presumably the reason you're a cabinet level official is because you've got some political wherewithal, some political sensitivity. This is a woman who alleges to have been the governor of South Dakota. She offers no evidence that she used to be the governor of a state in this country.
I had to look it up to make sure she was.
You've got to realize, first of all, you don't need to make a statement. There is no reason a cabinet level official needs to weigh in on your personal perception of a shooting.
That just happened, by the way. This is not like
even 6 months ago, you're not obliged to open your pie hole. Right. You might expect the guy's sergeant to say, his boss on an ill-advised moment of weakness standing up for his employee. You might expect a reporter to shove a microphone in his face and him saying, grow up. What this young man did was perfectly justifiable, and I'm not going to have you people railroading him. Bad idea to say that, but at least I would get it. Right? Some 32-year-old sergeant hothead blowing off steam trying to stand up for his buddy is something that you can understand. A cabinet level official who used to be the governor of South Dakota thinking that it's her job to go in front of the press and say things that she couldn't know to be true in advance of what has to be nothing shy of a criminal investigation, even if it's one that's designed to clear him, is so profoundly stupid. I would fire her.
No, you wouldn't, because if you were Trump, she did exactly what
that may
you expect her to do.
And her comments are one of the things that that caused bad reaction in Minnesota, right? Because now what do you have? You have the appearance that the federal government, she's the most senior federal official to weigh in on this until JD opens his pie hole a few hours later. you've got this situation where you make it look like the federal government is not interested in a dispassionate investigation. Not a good look. You had said earlier, a mile away from the Floyd incident.
Yeah.
The only reason Minnesota didn't burn to the ground is because people said they would conduct an investigation. And lots of parts did burn to the ground. But the way that you must mitigate that is to promise people, we will handle this dispassionately, in detail, carefully. We promise to be transparent.
Even if you don't
Even
mean
if you
it,
don't
I
mean
can't
it,
emphasize this enough.
you should mean it. But even if you don't,
Right.
everyone knows at least you've got to say it to calm everybody down.
Right. And getting up there, and again, optics matter, Mike. I know we always say, and we'll get to the Minnesota side of this, the mayor and the governor, but to stand there within hours, literally, of this happening, wearing a cowboy hat and tight jeans with teased out hair, like you're on the set, you just got off the set of Yellowstone or something, and you're standing there using words like domestic terrorist, rammed and dragged, like meaning like a complete disconnect from what the video showed, right? Because even if you reasonably held that he was in fear of his life, this and that, the words you use matter.
The words she used made it look like she hadn't seen the video, which undermined her claim that she knew what was going on, which made it look like she was biased, which made it look like he was guilty. That's the irony. When you lie,
right?
I don't think she was lying. When you misspeak about someone's defense, you make it look like you had to misspeak to defend someone, which makes it look like they were guilty.
Exactly, and it's very much. I will use the phrase, even if the president didn't instruct any of this, but it's a very Trumpian language, right? Everything was an exaggeration in that statement. Everything was 10 times above what it needed to be. She could have just said he was in fear for getting hit by that car. That's it. That would have been enough. But a domestic terrorist traveled hours to kill brave ICE warriors conducting their, like, I mean, the language was cinematic.
It would have been enough for her to have said nothing.
Actually, you know what would have been perfect? And I hate giving this person credit because I always
I know where you're going. I know where you're going. Exactly.
Tom Homan.
Who would have thought that he would have been the voice of reason?
This is why the world is coming to an end soon, Mike. I find myself saying, out of all the people involved in this situation, the one who gave the most reasonable, proper response
and
was Homan,
because he's the only guy with law enforcement experience.
Okay, fair enough.
This was not his first rodeo. It looked like it was Christie's first rodeo. And okay, let's move on to her brother JD. We haven't dispensed with JD yet. Okay. I know you want to let him off the hook.
All right, let's go.
I know you're a big JD fan, but he earned a little bit of criticism here. Okay. He said a couple of things that were really dumb. One, you put your finger on a moment ago, and we didn't get to it, but don't think I forgot when he brought up the prior incident that the shooter had been through. Now,
crazy.
He left the impression that you brought up, which is maybe he didn't say he was traumatized. I think you may have exaggerated the stupidity of what he said, but he certainly left that impression. He left the impression that this guy, this is his second rodeo. I think Vance said something like, you think he might have been sensitive to this, or, something like this. It's an important concept to bring up in trial in the right context. The prosecutor, if this were ever to go to trial, and it won't, the prosecutor would say, well, maybe he acted in a biased and unreasonable way because he had been traumatized. The defense should say he acted in a reasonable way And if anyone should understand the reality of the danger of the situation, it's a guy who's been through it before. So before you say this guy couldn't possibly have been acting in a reasonable fashion, I submit that the rest of us have got no business second guessing a guy who's been through it before in a similar situation, who knows whereby which he speaks and acts. That's the defense. But when JD shoots his mouth off on TV a year before the trial, he undermines the whole thing and leaves
Right.
it looking like he was a diminished, traumatized officer who maybe should be in counseling instead of out on the street.
Yeah, sitting at a desk doing some
Right.
kind of administrative work. I mean, that's what I took
Right.
away
And I
from it.
don't
But
think that that's what he meant. I think that what he meant was he
cut him a break. What he
well
was trying to
that
say, basically, he
he
was saying, cut him a
knows,
break.
he understands this, but Vance doesn't understand the concept of the prosecution having to clear the bar of no reasonable person could be doing this. He just appears to have never
You-
been awake during his criminal law course.
I was going to say, the Harvard
Yale.
lawyer, you would expect, I'm sorry, Yale, sorry, you would have expected better from, right? You're an Ivy League lawyer, allegedly. So that always raises the question, is everything that comes out of his mouth a performative speech?
It's hard to tell because he's
that's
very good
playing
at it. He was very animated. And that brings us to the second dumb thing he said. He introduced a new term of art. He led us to believe that it was a term of art. The reason it's not a term of art is because it's not even a concept in this country. And
Right.
that term, that phrase he used was absolute immunity. There's no such phrase because there's no such thing, because there's no such concept in this country. There's no such thing as absolute immunity. Now, you could come back and tell me, well, this guy's got nothing to worry about because Trump is going to pardon him. Okay, I could believe that. I could be convinced of that. I don't know that that's what JD wants to be out there saying, right?
And it doesn't address state charges, but anyway,
Well,
go ahead.
that's the other piece that I think Vance was trying to say, which is this is sort of a double liability type of situation. Courts have held that law enforcement officers are to be held accountable in federal court. State officers are to be held accountable in state court, and they shouldn't be crossing back and forth. Now, obviously, that gets violated because the federal government is all the time coming in and prosecuting state officers. But we believe that that federal courts are still going to continue to hold that federal officers are to be held accountable in federal court. That's where this gets tricky, right? Because that means that a federal court is very likely to say the state of Minnesota is not allowed to prosecute this guy. That's what Vance means. Now, he said it in a very inarticulate way, but I believe what he means is he's going to be held accountable by the federal government and federal court, and we ain't going to do a damn thing about it.
Well, that's the part B of it, right? To your point, it's not even the pretense of a fair
that's right.
investigation.
You know the old saying, we're going to give him a fair trial, then we're going to hang him.
Right. He's not even bothering with that. And
we're going to give him a fair investigation, then we're going to let him go.
Right. And it's a kangaroo court, obviously, if it even gets to that. And it was that point was further underlined by the announcement that the FBI will not be cooperating or sharing evidence with the state authorities.
Huge
Again,
mistake.
it's just the stacking of the deck. It's something that every J6er who complained, and it's something that they were complaining about it on the anniversary of J6, the day before this shooting, about all the like, oh, we got railroaded injustice and Ashley Babbitt and all that. And yet in this case, it's the exact opposite position. Again, we'll talk about. I don't want to get too deep into it, but it's the cognitive dissonance of simultaneously holding two seemingly opposite positions. But to be fair, Mike, because we're running out of time, let's switch over to the Minnesota side of
to
things.
wrap it up, Vance should have kept his mouth shut. Someone needs to
Of
be
course.
signaling from the federal government that accountability is important.
And it might be too late for that, honestly, because they've already played their hand. They've shown
The
that
only
they have
way
no
out of it
intention
is to say we screwed up. We made a mistake by excluding Minneapolis state officials. We want a joint investigation. We will be pursuing this in federal court because he's a federal officer, longstanding court precedent. We get that.
Right.
But in the interest of transparency and accountability, we're going to conduct the investigation alongside state police.
Gotcha. Let's talk about the mayor. He somewhat famously, in a response that was along the lines of Gnomes, but from the opposite side of the fence, saying, we want ICE to get the F out of the city. We want them out, And then Walt saying something, not exactly word for word, but the same sort of sentiment.
Look,
mobilizing the guard, I think, to prevent this supposedly from happening again. Talk to me about the Minnesota side of things.
First
Mike.
of all, Minnesota has a bad rule that says that the local police can't help. This is a huge mistake. If you don't like ICE operations, I get that. Personally, I believe that we are a nation of laws. If you're here illegally, the federal government has an obligation to enforce those laws, to take care of business. I don't like the way that ICE has operated in violation of the Fourth Amendment all too frequently. I don't like the way they don't coordinate with local police. I don't like the way that they're untrained for these situations. A lot of criticism. But if you don't like the way ICE is conducting business, you are not helping your community by not helping ICE. This situation got out of control because there wasn't crowd control, right? There wasn't a local police officer to effectuate that traffic stop. If one Minnesota police officer was there to make that traffic stop, much less two or three, I'm convinced the chances of Renee Good still being alive are 98%, notwithstanding her panic and mistake in the heat of the moment. They need to change that ordinance, or at the very least find a way to compromise and say our officers are not actually assisting in the operation if they're only there for crowd control, right? They're only there to make sure everyone is safe. It reminds me of, people call all the time and say, I just need an officer to stand by while I retrieve my belongings. I don't want my girlfriend to claim I did something violent. Or the woman will call and say, I just need to retrieve my belongings. I don't want my boyfriend or my husband to hit me right? You just need an officer to stand by. Your job is just to be there and make sure that there's no violence. Just be there and make sure nobody punches each other in the face. That's all you need. You can claim that that's not in violation of your state or local ordinance because you're not actually assisting ICE. You're just making sure that that was a big mistake, not having local cops or state cops out there. And by the way, it should be local cops, not state cops. State cops are barely better at this than federal officers, right? They're just on the highway all the time. Okay. If I understand, get the hell out. I understand that feeling. But that is something you say before, not after. Because now you've got a community that's up in arms, everyone's upset. And now you're going to automatically claim the officer was in the wrong, needs to be prosecuted. That's in effect what you're saying. No better than what Kristi Noem was saying. So you're just
Correct.
amping up the whole
I agree.
situation. And guess what? ICE isn't leaving. So now you're amping up a situation that's really going to be relevant. This isn't just I'm amping up the situation, talking about something that happened a month ago. This is ongoing. So
Oh,
now you've got more
you're
protests
pouring gasoline.
with more violence
Yeah.
than you otherwise would have had. What does ICE do? ICE has to, they've got very little choice. They can either leave, which they don't want to do for political reasons and because they believe that they need to enforce the laws. They have to stay. That means that their only other choice is to send in a couple of hundred extra officers for crowd control because they're not getting any help from the state of Minnesota.
And they don't know how
And
to
they
do
don't know
that
how to do
anyway.
that anyway. They're very bad at it. So
Right.
I'm not sure this situation is going to get any better. It's absolutely a hot mess. And then you've got Walz saying National Guard. Well, the only ones who are worse at this than ICE officials are the National Guard. And we love those kids, right? We love our kids. But they don't know how to make a traffic stop.
Right.
And I mean, let's be real. Some 20-year-old kid out there is going to tell an ICE officer, do me a favor and back away from this car. I'll take this. You don't have to worry about. Whereas, if you're a local cop and you're in that situation, it would not be hard to literally step in between the ICE officer and the vehicle, right? And say, look, you gentlemen get back in your car. I'll take care of this, right? I'll take care of
Right.
this. We're just going to make sure everyone is safe. Everyone's going to go home tonight. You cannot expect that from a 19 or 20-year-old National Guardsman to stand up to these ICE officers who act like they're on a mission from God.
Yeah. I agree. And the mayor was irresponsible, in my opinion. He is throwing gas on the fire there. You can make your opinion known in different
And
ways.
this is how bad conflicts start. This could get worse
absolutely.
before it gets better.
I unfortunately I agree with you because clearly the president is not backing down. Stephen Miller with his Goebbels-like
He's very helpful.
proclamations.
He's
is
very
not
helpful.
getting any
This would
better.
be a good moment for someone to swallow his pride. This would be a good moment for the president to call the governor, for the governor to take the call, and for the two of them to say, look, this ain't going to make me look good. This ain't going to make you look good. Let's do some pride swallowing here. I'm not going to ask you to make an apology, and I'm not going to make one either. But how about we do this? How about we agree that ICE operations are going to stand down for a while? I send them to a different state with the promise that we will be back, but we're going to coordinate, we're going to cooperate, we're going to figure out how to do business in a safer fashion. It's going to make me look better. It's going to make you look better. And at the end of the day, we're not going to have a lot of broken windows in your communities.
Yeah, that would be the adult thing to do, but I don't think that's happening on either side. I don't think Walz is interested in that, and I don't.
If
think
Walz was interested in that, he wouldn't be threatening the National Guard.
Agreed. So, and Mike, I think this just goes back to the overall context of everything you said about, yes, we are a nation of laws, but how those laws are executed, how they're enforced matters. The way it's perceived matters. And I think the perception now, even among perhaps the president's supporters, is that ICE may be just too aggressive. And not in the case of Ross, because I think he's a 10-year ICE agent, but I fear it could be worse because of this hiring spree of ICE. I mean, they hired so many people in such a short period of time. Basically, if you look at those recruitment videos, they're all like Call of Duty players, right? Like if you're just patriotic enough to shoot someone in the face, join ICE.
It's the wrong agency for this operation. They are fish out of water in an urban area. They're not trained for it. It shows. They don't look like they know what they're doing. And the other thing is, John, this is a little bit harder to articulate, but I'll take a shot at it. when I got out of the police academy, my goal was to do the job for 2 or 3 years. I
Mm,
ended up doing 11 and a half. And the reason was because I fell in love with not just the job, but the community, the responsibility. You fall in love with your
right.
zone. You fall in love with the
Mm,
people for whom you estimate that you have a little bit of responsibility, right? I don't want to overstate that, but you adopt the mindset. I'm not saying, me, this happens to police officers all the time. You realize that you have an opportunity to play a positive role in somebody's life, to
to
make
make
a
a difference,
difference.
as the
And
old saying.
presumably that's why
Yeah.
almost everyone becomes a police officer in the first place. I'd like to think it's everyone. That might be a little optimistic. And so you find yourself in this situation where when there's a crime committed in your zone, in your part of the town, you take it personally and you get to know these people.
Right.
Typically, a zone for which a police officer is responsible is too big to get to know everybody or even a serious proportion of everybody, but you get to know some of them and you get to know the patterns of how the community works. You get to know the nature
Sure.
of the community. And you find yourself wanting to do right by them. You find yourself thinking things like, I know sometimes my police department can do dopey things, but I'm going to do right by my people. I'm going to do right by my town. I'm going
Right.
to do right by this victim, this
Right.
situation. Maybe I'm only going to have 2 interesting calls today, but I'm going to handle them the way I want to. I'm going to handle them the way I think a constitutional officer should. Uh, Obviously, I was a registered libertarian already by that point, but you don't have to be, right? Just the idea that I
Right.
realize my role is to protect these people, and you
Right.
care, and that changes you as a person in some sense. It profoundly changes you as an officer. You're very different when you've done it for a couple years relative to when you come out of the academy. When you first come out of the academy, you're just trying to learn. And then you
Right.
adopt this responsibility. And then you go through another phase later on after you've done it for a decade where you become, jaded and you feel like, oh, I can't make the difference I wanted. And that's when it's time to go, right? That's when it's time to go.
Right.
I don't get the impression watching ICE either in the last few days or before then that they have fallen in love with these communities.
No, they. I don't get that
And
sense at all.
and that's
Yeah,
a
at all.
shame.
Yeah. Well, how can they? Right? They're federal. They're not. They're not local. They don't have that. To your point, they don't have that tie to the community, and they have no. Honestly, they have no interest in the community because they're out to get individuals. They're not out to help the community. All right, Mike. I think that's a decent point to end the episode on. It was a long one, folks, but as Mike said at the beginning, it's an important one, and there were no black and white answers here, but various shades of gray. All right, you've been watching Liberty Lens with my co-host and friend, Mr. Mike Termat. I'm Big John. Find us on Twitter at the handles there below. Also, subscribe to the channel, hit the like button, and don't forget to catch us again next week. Until that time, peace, everyone.